Good afternoon, friends, or evening, however late it is, wherever you are. And shalom, and blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Welcome to this episode of Un-Apologetics. This is the show where we are unapologetic about apologetics, and I am your host, CJ Cox. I want to go ahead and say some brief shaloms to people I see in the live chat. I see got Nate2D2. I'm not sure how to pronounce McKee or Mackie or however that is, but it looks like Mackie Sport Rose Garden. Drinking from the Rock, of course, Brother Phil Fox. BK Apologist, that's very cool. And Apologist in Detroit, I know you as well. I don't know if you guys know me or not, but nevertheless, shalom to you both. I watch your programs, and thank you for being here. See, Eric Peterson is in the live chat. And so far, I guess that's everybody who's made themselves. Oh, and Doki Doki, of course. Thank you for your super sticker, brother. I very much appreciate that. Shalom to you all, and thank you very much for being here. And anybody else who is here but has not made themselves known yet, shaloms to you as well. We're going to be having a very interesting conversation today that I'd like to get to as fast as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and rush through some of the announcements here. So if you like this video, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit the bell to get notified every time we go live, and leave any questions, comments, criticisms, or concerns either in the comment section below, or if you're here watching this live in the live chat. Of course, super chats get priority, but we'll try to keep up with the questions. And if I have any mods, if somebody asks a question and I lose track of it, please do let me know. If you'd like to follow some of the work that I do and other stuff like that on various social media platforms, you can do so. Gab, Parler, Facebook, Twitter, Minds, all at the tag The Synagogue. I guess Parler isn't really up anymore. I'm sure not a lot of people are on that website anyways. But at any rate, the other four, you can certainly find this channel on. Again, that's at the tag The Synagogue. Different display names on all of them, but nevertheless. And of course, you can support this ministry by way of Patreon, PayPal, Super Chats, or Super Stickers, if and only if you feel that it is worth it. I advise everybody to always give with trepidation. There is a glut of terrible content, and we don't need more of it. So certainly only give if you think that the channel deserves it. Want to remind everybody that tomorrow we're going to be on the Freed Thinker podcast having a conversation with former Reformed apologist Tyler Vela. We're going to be discussing the issue of, and I don't think my microphone's plugged in. I'm glad you guys can hear me, but I just realized the quality's probably not that great. Anyways, we're going to be having a discussion on some of the intellectual reasons for his deconversion. So that'll be hopefully very fruitful. And then we will also this Friday have a conversation with whoever wants to join. Sabbath night open mic every Friday night, 10 p.m. Mountain Time. If you guys are interested in joining, please do show up. The topic is going to be cessationism and continuationism, but obviously it's an open mic, so sometimes we end up getting off topic. If you want to join, please do so, and I appreciate anybody who does. Also, Wednesday, we will be announcing a new series here, a video blog titled Breakfast Tea. Will be published 8 p.m. every Wednesday, hopefully, or maybe every other Wednesday. Depends on how fast I can get these scripts out. And the topic this week is going to be free grace theology. And lastly, I want to remind anybody who's interested, I will be publishing a work here in about a month, 18 questions for the Reformed answered. If anybody has questions on Reformed theology, I take 18 of the most common objections to Reformed theology, specifically the determinism aspect, as provided to me by my friend Graham Gould, and we'll be answering those in a somewhat short and palatable manner, probably only about 100-ish pages once editing is done, but that is going to be out here very soon, and I appreciate anybody who's interested. All right. So that's everything as far as channel housekeeping is concerned. We are going to go ahead, and I just got switched over to my mic, so let me know, guys, if you can hear me. Hopefully it should be clearer now, but nevertheless. We're going to go ahead and jump into a prayer today, and then we're going to get started with our program. Anybody here who is, of course, believing, I certainly recommend you do so. Join us, I probably should have said that part earlier. And let's go ahead and jump right into this. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation today with my brother Phil. Lord Jesus, I know that this topic has been a fairly sensitive one in the last, really, it's just since the beginning of this nation, but especially in the last 10 years. Some of this has, of course, been very positive and some of it has been very negative. But regardless, Lord, your body needs to come to unity with each other, Lord Jesus, such that we are having respect for the truth, such that we are having respect for our brethren, and such that we are able to heal in a way which I just think has been very difficult to provide recently, Lord. I have no delusions of grandeur here to think that we are going to solve all the problems in our little hour and a half conversation, Lord Jesus. But I pray that you anoint us each with the Holy Spirit, Lord Jesus, that we may be able to come to some understanding. The different perspectives we're coming from, of course, have to meet in the middle somehow, Lord. And we are both faithfully wanting to serve you as best we can and serve your body as best we can and serve our brothers in Adam as best we can, even regardless of their faith. So I just ask, Lord Jesus, that you bless this stream, bless the ears that hear this stream, Lord Jesus, and use it only for the glorification of your kingdom. And we give you the glory in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, brother. And we got a couple new people, Jamie Russell, and is that the real Vocab Malone? I don't know. If that is,
Vocab.
cool to see you here.
What's up, bro? Good to see
And
you,
Kelly
man.
Fire as well. So shalom, brother Phil, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Absolutely. This is the second conversation we've actually had. Well, on the channel at least, of course. We've talked a little bit elsewhere, but
Yeah.
kind of a long time coming. We were going to have a panel discussion like 8 months ago, and then one of the panel members fell through. I was never able to get a replacement, and then it just kind of eventually said, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to try and get a replacement. Let's just get the ball rolling. I appreciate your patience and all that and willingness to come on. How are you today, brother?
Yeah, doing well. Blessed. Before we get too far, first of all, I wanted to just let people know that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Anishinaabe and the Potawatomi, which is now modern day southeastern Michigan. I am a member of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes of North Dakota, and Nidosha Midishi Maihagadesh Hetz. My name is Defeats the Enemy, but my English name is Philip Fox. And my name was given to me by my grandfather, who was a fighting man, and he gave me a warrior's name. And so I carry that name, Maihagadesh, very proudly because I'm not a fighting man. But he said the only reason why he could give me that name was because I was, every time that my eyes open in the morning and my feet hit the ground, that I'm going to war for my people against the evil one. So that's why I was able to have that name and carry that name very proudly.
Yeah, and it is a very cool thing too. I only recently got really into my own cultural heritage, which is Jewish, and a lot of my new friends who are Jew, I say new, but it's half a decade now. But they kind of have a similar sense of pride where it's like there's this kind of like a German or an English or whatever whatever country they come from name, but then they also have a Hebrew name, and I always thought that was a really cool thing, a good way to hold on to your heritage. It's just a very cool thing.
Amen.
But so for those in the audience, how we're going to start this is I'm going to give Brother Phil a 10-minute maximum and then myself a 10-minute maximum to kind of explain our respective positions on this topic, which is American history in light of the Christian faith. I suspect, and in fact, I can almost guarantee there is going to be a good deal of disagreement, but also a good deal of agreement in this conversation. The main reason I wanted to have this conversation is because while we may ultimately be on different sides of, I don't know if you'd call this the political aisle, but maybe the historical aisle, we're ultimately on the same side of the religious aisle, which I think is important. I mean, too often people, when they're having this conversation, there is a very genuinely far left progressive Christianity, And there's also a very genuinely far right kind of Christian nationalist Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And suffice it to say, they don't really listen to each other. So for
Right.
those of us who are still recognizing, hey, we're both conservative Christians, even if we may have certain different theological disagreements here and there, but on this issue, we're on quote unquote separate sides. To have that acknowledgement and then come together to have this conversation, I think is very important. So, go ahead.
No, just saying, no, just agreeing.
My apologies. So yeah, I want to give Brother Phil an opportunity to give as much time as you need, upwards of 10 or as many as 10 minutes, to kind of just explain your thoughts around this issue. And then I'll do the same. And then from there, we'll just have free flowing conversation about the issue. And my brother Jamie here says, no holding back, no holds barred. I don't think it'll be that. I don't think it'll be that serious, but I appreciate what you're saying, Jamie. Regardless, though, if you'd like to say anything before that 10 minutes, go ahead. Or if not, just jump right in, and I appreciate you.
No, yeah, I mean, I'll just jump right in because, and I appreciate, first of all, I mean, again, before we get too far, I just want to thank you for the invite, and having this conversation, because, I posted on Facebook before we went on, like, I'm sure there's going to be some disagreements here, but, we can have a conversation like men, and we can also have a conversation as brothers in Christ. And even though we might disagree theologically, and also we might, disagree on some of the social issues and those types of things, like it's important, I think, for us to sit down and have these types of conversations, so that way people can see that you can sit down and even disagree, but still maybe there's something that the other side has that you can actually chew on, and it's not all just rhetoric, or it's not all just, the straw man that everyone sort of seems to do with one another, because everyone sort of just has these certain, ammunition, right? They're talking points that they've heard on Fox News, or they heard on MSNBC, or they've heard from their pastor who might be a little more progressive, or they heard from their pastor who may be a little more conservative, so instead of just formulating talking points, I think these conversations are important so that way we can have a robust conversation, and not just simply throw terms on and blanket terms onto people. And I just pray that this conversation is thought-provoking. And even if you disagree with me, like, my thing is, like, I'm not here to represent, I'm not here to represent CRT. I'm not here to represent progressive Christianity. I'm not representing any of that kind of stuff. Nor am I representing a leftist point of view politically. I consider myself a political agnostic. I'm not sold out to either, Republican rhetoric or Democratic rhetoric. I think that they're all equally ridiculous, and I think that they're both equally opportunistic. And so I just to set the table and to make that clear, like, I'm not here representing one side or the other. And my focus and the focus of those that I hang around and that I try to make sure that I surround myself with are people that are trying to run as true center as possible. So it might sound different to your ear, though, because most people aren't talking about these types of things. So to me, the question at hand is, and according to the focus of this, is Christianity and American history. And so I come from a very different perspective, more particularly because I'm Native American, full-blood Native American. And I mean, well, as close to full-blood Native American as you can get. There is no such thing as full-blood anymore, because there's been so much, intermarriage and those types of things. So so the thing is that, so, but I culturally, I'm Native American. I grew up Native American. I am Native American. And there's been unfortunately because of the church, right? Because of the church and because of American history in general, there has been this development of this massive chasm between being culturally native and spiritually Christian. And so what Christianity has told us, and I'm using generic terms here. So when I'm using terms, so again, like I said, please don't this is going to sound different to your ear. I'm not meaning this to sound separatist, or I'm not meaning this to sound like, I want to create a chasm between us and them. I'm just using terms. Okay, so just please bear with the talk, so that way we understand and know what I'm saying, and it's not meant to be divisive or even racially radicalized. Okay, so I'll use terms like white and native, talking about the white man and those types of things, because this is the common vernacular. But I do not mean anything racial by it or any kind of those. So just so we're defining terms, okay? So historically, there has been, because of the white man, and unfortunately, Christianity has had a gatekeeper mentality when it comes to westernized Christianity. And Christians, and especially first contact Christians and those types of things, they've had historically have created this understanding that it's impossible for you to be culturally native and spiritually Christ. How do we know this? Well, there's several ways that the United States government, first of all, and also the church. And so when I'm speaking, there's going to seem to be some conflation, because we tend to think in our modern American mind, we tend to think that there's a clear definition between church and state. But all the research and the things that I have done throughout my looking into, because I've been studying very heavily things like the doctrine of discovery. And what I'm beginning to find out is that there is almost nearly impossibly so no separation from church and state, because I don't believe that the United States was essentially based upon Christian principles. I think it likes to think that it was, but what they did do is that the United States of America weaponized Christianity to serve itself and to bring on things of itself to help enrich itself and to push itself towards manifest destiny. And so some of these terms are very loaded. And if you have questions on those things, I also have some studies on my channel, very in-depth studies as to what these are, with receipts, looking at all of the history and the things that from a different perspective. These are things that you're not going to learn in your average day public school. But these, using American history, using all the sources throughout American history, using the United States' own constitution, looking at the Declaration of Independence, all of these types of things. So there is this chasm that has been made by the church and also by the United States, and both of them together creating this narrative that it's impossible for us to be culturally native and spiritually Christian. And I get that the common argument is that, well, we're supposed to be culturally Christ and our culture should come from Christ. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the context in which that we are in the context in which we live, because it's impossible for you to say, oh, well, you cannot be an American and also be a Christian. How are you going to separate yourself from being an American completely? Right? Because that's who you are. That's who we are. This is the context in which that God has put us in. But yet there's this ideology as if, no, that doesn't apply to us because we are the ones who are Christians. This is a Christian equals America and America equals Christian, is what a lot of people are thinking by default. Again, but so there has been this chasm that has been developed over time that is telling people like me and people of color and looking at American history throughout the ages, right? So what are some of the things that we can see and have seen in the United States? So one of the clearest and easiest things to point out is the development of boarding schools to and literally this was the slogan was kill the Indian, save the man. General Pratt was the one who coined that term, and it was initially modeled after the United States military, how they did boot camp and how they separated the individuals to keep them away from their get them away from their families so that they can turn them into what they wanted to create them to be, right? So that model was taken and applied to Native children and also applied to, so that way they can separate them and pull their culture away from them and shape them and mold them into assimilation practices. So this is these are some of the things and how we, and excuse the dog, but these are some of the things that we, that from my perspective, that it's absolutely clear that there are things that America itself, and that this is just one side of the coin. This is just from my Native American perspective. This isn't even from the African American perspective. But again, to sort of close out, what I'm trying to communicate is that America likes to put itself and keep itself in, has this mindset about itself, is that we are a country that pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. But the reality is that this country was built upon stolen land, using stolen resources, off the backs and through the work of stolen people. But yet we have the audacity to think that we are the most moral nation, that we are the most industrious nation, and that we did it all on our own. But meanwhile, we like to forget that there are all these other principles that are surrounding that cause the United States and also the church, right? Because the church was also in bed with all of this, especially early on. And the church was co-signing this because these were all things that and again, like the constitutions, the early constitutions of each state, they have discovery language within it, which is based upon religious principles. It's a religious doctrine. So that's why it's impossible to feel and to think that there is absolutely a separation of church and state. It's impossible to have that concept, especially here in the United States, because so many of our principles are built upon those things. And again, I don't call them Christian doctrines. Those were religious doctrines that were abused and used for domination and for colonization. So that's my side of the story. So yeah, I don't know where you want to go from there, CJ.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot, and I'll go ahead and lay out some of my thoughts here, and then we'll just kind of jump into open dialogue. Of course, not the same perspective, but I also have a somewhat unique perspective, I would say, on this issue. In that so for those who do not know, anybody who may be new here, I am Jewish and very proudly so. And one of the reasons why I had to sort of rediscover my Jewishness is because in doing a study of my family, figured out that my grandpa Schubert, who I knew, he was my grandmother's grandfather, but I knew him. He passed away when I was 10 years old. Him and his family and the other Schuberts, that which, as you may be able to guess, is a Yiddish last name, had sort of beaten that part of their heritage away. You know, it was like and to such an extent that he was actually one of the more racist individuals I've ever met in my life. Which, come to figure out over time, it was a little bit of overcompensating for something. It was kind of like in order to deflect this idea that we are these outsiders, we're instead going to not only become insiders, but become so hateful against the outsiders that nobody suspects that we're actually from the outside ourselves. You know what I mean? And that was a very interesting and weird thing to discover. Another thing that had kind of colored my view about this from a very early age was one of my earliest political, I don't know if you would say role models, but somebody who I admired very much was a gentleman by the name of Russell Means, who, for those who do not know, was a member of the American Indian Movement. He was very big on this idea of establishing, and this is what caught my attention at least, because there were many things he was big on, but he was big on establishing this idea of a Republic of Lakota in what we today call Montana, Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, and a little bit of Wyoming. And it was exactly like it sounds, basically a Native American nation, right? And I remember thinking as a kid that sounded an awful lot like what Jewish people did for themselves in the form of Zionism. How it's like this establishment of a nation in historic homelands so that we can actually have a place of our own where, you know, it's like you can live in New York City if you like. But if it just so happens that everybody in New York City doesn't want Jews around anymore, you have a place of refuge, a place to go to, and it happens to be your historic homeland as well. But also on the flip side of that, where my grandpa Schubert was from was Tennessee. And I grew up having a good deal of admiration for people who it's not politically correct to have admiration for today, like Stonewall Jackson, for example, general in the American South, or even Robert E. Lee, another general in the American South, people from the Wild West, like Billy the Kid and stuff like that. Writers, like Mark Twain and so on and so forth, who were pretty flamboyant with their use of racially insensitive language. And even to a small extent, is one of the things I started to realize is that would bleed over to other sides of the aisle there as well. So like you'd read Abraham Lincoln, for example, and as it turned out, wasn't quite as, I don't know what the word, he wasn't quite as progressive as everybody thought, right? And you'd look at this, there was this perspective, and I'm maybe getting a little disjointed in how I'm saying this, but there was this perspective I had developed or I had seen from my friends in the South and my family in the South of, seeing the not so good side of an American hero like Abraham Lincoln, the side that overthrew an elected state government and arrested journalists and didn't give them trial and just kept them indefinitely, and operated camps which were bad enough that we could classify them as concentration camps, and it wouldn't even be that much of an exaggeration. Now, to be fair, as it turns out, Andersonville and stuff like that existed in the South as well. All of this stuff is to say that I started to develop this view that American history and history in general is incredibly complicated. The heroes and the villains that we like to perceive in our past, they don't really exist. They're like figments of the imagination. And in reality, you have a lot of deeply flawed individuals who shape the world in whatever way the Lord actually allows them to shape it by way of their ascertaining of power. And then the last thing I wanted to sort of say that kind of helped with this perspective of mine was studying Martin Luther and realizing that as much as I admired Martin Luther, he would very much hate somebody like me, namely a Baptist and a Jew. On the Jews and Their Lies is one of the most vile texts I've ever read in my entire life. For those of you who consider yourself to be Protestant, you should read it because it causes you to rethink, I think, a lot of things. Not so much rethink Protestantism or anything like that, but again, that idea of heroes and villains in the past, do they really exist? Was Martin Luther a hero, or was he a guy, a deeply flawed individual, who, despite everything he did for the church, was deeply anti-Semitic, was deeply classist, was deeply entrenched in this idea that the state has a right to punish you for your religious beliefs, and weaponized that state against people like the Anabaptists, right? And so all of this is just to say, I started to feel like it's not fair to look at these individuals as purely evil, but it's also not fair to look at them as purely good. When somebody says, I think we need to take down a statue of such and such an individual, or I think that we can't go to a certain conference because that individual may have been associated with less than Orthodox Christian beliefs. And for those who are reading between the lines, Robert E. Lee, Martin Luther King, that's not a clear picture. That's not a good way to look at history. It's not that simple. In other words, was Martin Luther King guilty of some things? Maybe. Did he do a lot of great? Yes. Was Robert E. Lee guilty of some things? Did he do a lot of great? Yes. Was Martin Luther guilty? He's not American, but nevertheless, were they guilty of some things? Were they great in other facets? Yes. And squaring that circle, I think, helps us to avoid a certain level of what I might otherwise term as a kind of modernist bigotry that I'm very worried about. And it's not so much that it's bigotry, because it's bigotry against a group of people that doesn't exist anymore, right? They're all dead. So what do I mean by that? Why does it matter? It's not like we can oppress them. Well, obviously we can, I think, wrongfully look at people's views, but also I think, and this is the last thing I'll say, I hope I'm not being too disjointed when I talk about this. I worry that we have a kind of mentality in the modern world, because we look at history as heroes and villains, where we kind of are a little bit self-righteous. And I'm going to give an example that's incredibly pointed, but I think it'll make the point. 200 years ago, and I can't speak for your particular tribes, brother, but I do happen to know a little bit about the tribes like the Comanche, right? 200 years ago, a Comanche would, in his quest to fight for his homeland, brutalize women and children, but he is defending his homeland. So is it really black and white? And on the same side, I'm a white guy, and 200 years ago, I would be essentially involved in genocide. And yet at the same time, there's none of that, none of the things that those people at the time considered to be quote unquote savage. And I do put that in quotes because I don't think that's fair, but that is the terminology they would have used, right? And we today look at that and we say, no, we're so much different. We're so much evolved. We wouldn't have been that way. But if you were a Comanche 200 years ago, are you sure you wouldn't be that way? And if you were a white American 200 years ago, are you sure you wouldn't be that way? I don't think it's that simple. Did John Browns exist? They did. And more power to them. They were heroes. But most people weren't John Brown. Most people weren't breaking the mold and getting and shedding all of the evil in their particular culture. Most people, if they were white Americans, were racist and were okay with slavery and were okay with white supremacy and all that other kind of things. And a lot of people from various other groups have the same problems, right? A lot of the Comanche were okay with brutalizing people. A lot of people in the Zulu lands and the Maori lands and in the Russian lands and in the Chinese lands and in every insert culture name here, nobody's exempt. They were okay with that kind of stuff. And when we start to think, I would have been different, to me, that is a form of self-righteousness that I don't think can be accepted in the body of Christ. But it is not to discredit any of the other things that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go ahead and stop there because I think I've probably gone over 10 minutes. But nevertheless, I think with what we were given with Brother Phil and what I was able to lay out there, hopefully it was coherent enough. Maybe we can have a good conversation here. Go ahead, brother.
No, yeah. No, I appreciate that, because I mean that your perspective, is, to tell you the truth, I mean, it's a, to coin a phrase, it's a fresh of breath air. You know what I mean? Because these things are complicated, right? And historically, in this country, if you ask, like, who was the greatest American president, it's always, oh, it was Lincoln, or it was Washington, right? So, but people are like, it was good old Abe, honest Abe, and all these types of things. But I don't have that most fond view of Abraham Lincoln. because first off, he didn't care about slavery. Like, read the Lincoln Douglas debates, when he was jockeying for political power.
Mhm.
Right? He basically said, like, if slavery is going to do it, then I'll leave slavery alone. But if it's not going to do it, then I'll abolish it. I'm worried about the Union. That's what I'm worried about. So for him, right, black bodies were just a pawn. And while he was in his presidency, um, homesteading was probably an absolute blessing to people, getting 60 acres of their own to be able to plot and to farm and to create the possibility of generational wealth. Yeah, that sounds fantastic, but guess what? That was land that was taken away from my fellow tribesmen directly, and other tribes that, yeah, sure, historically, yes, we were warring with each other and those types of things. And you can say that. Absolutely, we were. But the thing is we were warring out of survival, not out of greed and genocide. There's a difference. And so American genocide is a lot different than tribes warring against one another. That's just flat out, that's a completely different conversation. Because it was the whole foundation of American genocide was greed. And that's it. It can all be boiled down to that. It was greed, and it was land grabs, and it was resources, but all of that points right back to what? Greed. And so yes, there were tribes that were warring against each other, and I'm not making excuses for that. But that's the thing. That's the argument that I constantly hear, against my position, or against whenever I want to push back against the romanticizing American history. Right? Is well, your people were warring against each other too. It wasn't just Pocahontas in a canoe, rowing down a lazy river. Like, I understand that. But the thing is what most people don't realize is that there were other things that we did with each other too. Like, no, we didn't just go around killing each other. We understood and knew that it wasn't good for us to eliminate an entire tribe, because that would eliminate the possibility if we needed to have allies and to be able to flourish and gain understanding and gain perspective. Because all the other thing that is missed during these conversations is how many tribes actually shared culture. They shared religious practices. They shared resources, despite what the history books paint us as just simply mere mindless savages who knew nothing of war. Go read the Declaration of Independence. It doesn't speak very highly of Native people. It's right in there. The merciless Indian savages, right, who are in our lands, right, in the Declaration. It's right in there. You look at all men are created equal. Oh yeah, except for those savages, right? So there's these dehumanization principles that was deeply embedded and steeped within American culture. But so that's the thing, is that those things are missed because the common lore and what you're taught about Native Americans and my people is always, you open your social studies book and oh yeah, these people were hunter gatherers and they had these fights and these types of things, but it's all so generic, and we're just one chapter within this whole book, and yet everyone thinks that they have it figured out when it comes to the injustices and the things that happen in this country, especially because a lot of this stuff is foundational. What do you do with a faulty foundation? What do you do with that? If you have a faulty foundation, what are you going to do with that house or that building or that thing? Right? And here it is. Those who hear that, right? So again, please don't, because I know where people's minds go automatically when they hear stuff like that. He's speaking CRT. Like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm challenging us to do is, like, look, you can repair a foundation when it's sitting there. It's more costly. it's more demanding, but we need to look at the foundations first. And so that's what I'm advocating for. And that's why I want to have these types of conversations. And so that would be my thought is essentially, and I know I said a lot there. So, if you ever need to jump in, brother, please feel free to jump in. If there's, because I know it's like we just pile on like truckfuls of information and then try to deal with one thing.
It is a huge topic, right? And a lot of the things that are said there, I think are very much true. Although of course I think I might provide a little pushback on some of it. I think one of the things that's particularly annoying to me about people on my own side, and Matt Walsh just said it recently, talking about, colonialism was noble, I think was his word.
They actually did a video on that just recently refuting that.
Yeah, and by the way, friends, definitely check that out. I can't directly endorse it because I haven't watched it yet, but I've watched a lot of Brother Phil's content. It's very good. And I will be watching that, actually, now that I know it exists. But, it's like it's the same kind of view you were just kind of talking about, right? Where it's like it's this very simplistic, tribes were savages. And we have this idea of guys with, very poorly designed tomahawks running around in loincloths. And, that's of course not really accurate. I'm sure it's accurate for some tribes somewhere. But, there's something like 500 Native American tribes and, plus Canada, which is very similar groups of people in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly similar in the sense that they're indigenous, but even like Algonquins would live both in America and in and stuff like that. And it's a very simplistic view that kind of tries to get people off of the hook for what was done in history. At the same time, I will admit, I do think there's a sense in which I want to be clear here, it's not a whataboutism, but there is a sense in which that kind of argumentation can help, in so much as that, I do think we often get this idea, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, that, like I said, it's like these heroes and villains kind of thing, right? It's like, so right. On one end, there's the noble Americans who are conquering these savage natives. And then on the other end, there's like the noble natives who are defending their homeland from a genocidal government. And it's like, well, really, both sides have a lot of truth to them in a way, right? Like there is brutality to go around, which doesn't get anybody off the hook. In fact, if anything, it just makes everybody guilty. But it does, I think, try to help us to understand that it's not really fair for us to look back at history and just say bad, good, bad, good, bad, good, as if there isn't a little bit of nuance in it. I'll say one of the biggest, by the way, I appreciate what you just did in the private chat. That'll be a good way for me, because I don't think any of my mods are actually here. Well, Jamie's here, but I don't think Jamie actually heard me earlier. Anyways, one of the perfect examples I've always found of this is the Confederate States of America. Clearly bad, right? Except the highest ranking Native American official in American history was Stan Waddy, a native. Well, actually, Charles Curtis eventually, the vice president, did end up surpassing him. But Stan Waddy, at least in military terms, he's the only one to attain the rank of general. Likewise, Judah Benjamin, for a very long time, was the highest ranking Jewish individual in political history. That does not mean that the Confederacy was somehow off the hook for what they did to Black people, but it does show it's not as black and white, as, for pun totally intended, by the way, as people are trying to make it out to be, right? Like there is some ways, surprisingly enough, that the Confederacy was actually more progressive than America would be for another 100 years. And nowadays, of course, we've well surpassed that. Thank the Lord, and hopefully we can surpass it further. But suffice it to say, it's like, that there is, what I'm trying to say is there is utility in that. Well, Native Americans had their own bad practices too, in so much as that it does, I think, try to humble us to understand, okay, none of us are off the hook, which means we should all be trying to do something about it, right? In other words, it's like, how do I want to word that? It's not to say, well, you guys did it too, therefore America's okay. But I think it is to say, well, that is the way the time was. So maybe we should, in humility, come together and recognize that we all have to progress farther than what our ancestors were doing without labeling them as necessarily being villainous or evil or anything like that. One of the better examples that will pertain to our conversation is Oliver Howard, the so-called Christian general, right? Depending on your view, if you're a gun-toting American, he's the Christian general. If you're an African American, he's the guy who endowed Howard University. If you're a Native American, he's the guy who captured Chief Joseph and numerous other atrocities against Native Americans, right? And so it's like, there's no, like I said, there's plenty of blame to go around, and that needs to be acknowledged, but it also needs to be acknowledged that he did do a lot of genuinely good things at the same time. You know what I mean? And so it's like, and actually, this will be one of the last points I want to say on that, to that point of the foundations, right? It's also a mixed bag. One of the foundations of America is Protestants fleeing the Church of England and fleeing Roman Catholicism and stuff like that for religious liberty. And part of it is a republic centered on human rights, the likes of which had not been established in the West since Venice. And then, of course, also part of it is we want to move past the Appalachian Mountains and conquer all of this land that belongs to the Native Americans, and the British won't let us. And part of it is, hey, we bring a bunch of black people over here, and there is tons of crops we've never even heard of, like tobacco and cotton and stuff like that. That can make us what would amount to today billions of dollars. Back then, it would have been probably millions, but account for inflation and stuff like that.
Right.
And like neither of those narratives is wrong. They're actually both equally true, which I think is a tough thing for people to grasp.
Right. And my my pushback to those types of things would be like, listen, I'm not advocating, specifically, I'm not advocating for, some kind of reparations or some kind of, that we all need to become Native American. I know that sounds crazy, but the thing is that there's such a romanticization. I don't even know if that's a word, but the Christian church, Western Christian church, American Christian church, heavily romanticizes American life and lifestyle. And our job is not to just simply be American. We are supposed to be representing King Jesus. And there's too many folks like Walsh, right? We talked about Walsh, and I know that there's extreme examples out there, right? But I think that we've become too Americanized, even especially in our Christianity, that hearing the opposite perspective, it causes us to have this knee-jerk reaction. Because see, the thing that most people when people hear me now, a lot of folks forget the fact that I was a extreme conservative in the vein of oppressing myself culturally. I had to absolutely oppress and suppress all of my cultural anything in order to, in my mind and what was ingrained in me, to become ready to be a Christian. And so it's that imbalance that causes these types of things where I can't learn anything from the opposite. But the fact of the matter is, and the point is that we have become idolaters to America and American Christianity. Because I would even challenge people to say, look, because people think like, oh, well, this is how Christianity is done. There was a question in the chat, talking about, he said he goes to Africa sometimes, and sometimes he feels like, we're trying to quote go there and fix it. And sometimes that's the wrong mentality to have. And that was the mentality that Christianity brought to the Americas, is that we are going to come and fix you savages. And the fact remains is that these people understood and know that a lot of our cultural things that I'm starting to understand, and the things that are my cultural norms, look more like early Christianity than the Christianity that was brought here, because the principles are upside down. And especially the Christianity that was brought here and that was sold to my people, telling them that they need to shave their heads or cut their hair in order to be proper, to be able to be a Christian, to give them Christian names. There's no such thing as a Christian name.
Yeah, Christian name always ironically happens to be an English one, right?
English, right? Yeah. And so that's why I say my English name is Philip Fox, because that was given to me by my mother, but my name is Ma'ihagatesh. In English, it defeats the enemy. That's why I make that distinction, because I do have and there's nothing wrong with me to be culturally Native American. That's the context in which God has put me in. But we have made American Christianity, and also the American church has made itself the gatekeeper, saying like, and here's evidence. Here's evidence. Why are we going to Africa? And why is the pastor now wearing a white button down with black pants? Why is the pastor not able to wear his own traditional garb? Why? Is it because it's so ingrained in his culture that he can't even wear his normal garb, and that it's considered demonic? Because those are the same practices that were told to my people, that we couldn't even wear our own garb, or just our simple clothing, because for the white Europeans that came here, to them it was offensive, so therefore it was demonic. So it's those principles that are still embedded within the church today. How do I know? Because I've went through some of this. The gatekeeper mentality. There was a young girl, and I've told this story a few times on a few different channels, but we had this beautiful young lady who came to Christ, and she danced what we understand and know as what's called the medicine dress. It's commonly called the jingle dress. And it's this single cloth dress, but tied to it are these little cones that make noise, and it kind of has it sounds like rain when they dance. And so they dance this particular dance, and it's beautiful. And so she came to Christ, and she asked our pastor and his wife if she can dance for the congregation to bless us, because we're blessed by that. We can identify with that. We understand the beauty of it. And so we can actually contextualize and appreciate what she was about to do for us. And so we allowed it as a congregation. Now, fast forward a few months, and we were telling this story about how this young lady, this beautiful young lady, wanted to dance for the Lord and use the gift that she was given, and express herself through the culture to the glory of God. And we were telling this story to a group of pastors who were white, and their jaws were on the floor. And I was standing there amongst them, and immediately I disappeared. And one of the pastor's wives was so appalled, and she, before the story could even be done and finished, she just blurts out, "You can't do that." Why? Because we have this gatekeeper mentality in the American church that this is what Christianity looks like, this is what it acts like, this is what it should be, and if you are not that, you cannot be. And so these are the things. So that's why I challenge, because Christianity, what we don't understand is that the way that we do church in America is a contextualized version of Christianity. The way that the Europeans were doing Christianity was a contextualized version of Christianity. How do we know? Because it looked nothing like the way that they did it in the first century. That's what we need to realize. And that's what I challenge my brothers and sisters in Christ, is to understand that we are in a contextualized version of Christianity right now, because we are trying to fit it as best as we can and communicate it the best way that we can in our context in which we live. And there is no right or wrong way to eat a Reese's, right? Because and yes, again, that's the thing, is I'm not advocating for universalism either. I'm not advocating for any heresy that may be coming to your mind at this point, because I believe that Jesus Christ rose again on the third day, that he died for my, and I have to believe in him for my salvation, him and him alone, that it's through faith, right? And not of works. So I understand all the fundamentals. It's some of these fringe things that we get so far apart on that we can't even come together to have a conversation. And so
Yeah.
I've been talking a ton, so go ahead, brother.
Oh, no, you're all right. I appreciate it. I think one of the things that, because immediately I can hear, the hypothetical man in the background who says, well, yeah, but so many things about culture are so destructive. And of course, certainly there's truth to that, right? In the
Sure.
sense of, the Japanese for a long period of time worshipped their emperor, or the Middle Eastern practice of circumcising women, or the practice in Miami of putting girls in bikinis and having them dance around. Oh, wait a minute, that's America,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Right.
And my point in saying that is just to say, like,
Right.
because I added that last one tongue in cheek to say, right, all culture has certain destructive elements about it, but all
Exactly.
culture has certain good elements about it too. For example, you use the same three. The Japanese have a very can only be described as beautiful look at family and honor, and honoring one's ancestors and where they came from and stuff like that, that is not found in many other cultures. The Middle East has a reverence for beauty and wisdom, or beauty in wisdom, excuse me, over beauty in youth. In other words, the beauty of one who has a lot of good things to say from a life well lived versus the beauty of somebody who's physically attractive, right? And America has its own positive qualities as well, such as the fact that we tend to allow people to speak their mind and have religious liberties and things like that. And so to preempt that potential person who says, but culture is destructive, not only can we point out certain destructive things about American culture as well, but also I'm reminded of the Quartodeciman controversy from the early church, where, for those who don't know, Easter was being celebrated in two different ways by the early church. One group was celebrating on Nisan the 14th, which is the first day of Passover, and essentially it just was Passover. And one group was celebrating basically the same way we do today, the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, right? And Polycarp and Anicetus met with each other and they argued about this. And then they said, okay, well, you can't convince me and I can't convince you. And both of us believe we got this from the apostles. So let's shake hands, remain brothers, and go back to celebrate Easter the way that we did, right? Now, of course, through the centuries, eventually the Quartodecimans got squashed. And now a lot of people look at Christians who celebrate Passover with a little bit of a cockeye. But the point is, for Polycarp and Anicetus, the cultural differences, since they weren't anything that stepped on the gospel, weren't anything that stepped on the Bible, weren't that big a deal. It was like, right, it was like, well, we'll talk about it for a little bit, even argue to an extent, but in the end, Polycarp can go back to the Asiatic churches and celebrate Easter the way he does, and Anicetus can go back to Rome and celebrate Easter the way he does. And there's so many other examples of this that you found in the early church. Some people would still worship on the Sabbath, like the Nazarenes. Some people would worship on what we today call the Lord's Day or Sunday, like those who wrote the Didache. And they didn't argue with each other about it. Council of Laodicea comes later on, and then you have that problem. But nevertheless, right? The Greek Bible would say in the beginning was the Logos. The Chinese Bible would say in the beginning was the Tao. And it's the same concept, but obviously put into its own cultural context. And so my point there in saying that is like I kind of am wanting to defend you a little bit to say, the idea that we all have to have the same culture isn't really, not only is it not biblically true, but it's not even historical
Right.
Christianity, right?
Right.
It wasn't something that the early church believed. In fact, I would argue the way that it started to become a thing was by way of the Roman Empire adopting Christianity, which ironically enough maybe is somewhat analogous to this idea of Christian nationalism.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the early church getting in bed with government was definitely where all of these things had to change, right? That's the theology had to change instantaneous because Christianity went from a heavily persecuted, right? And I know that this wasn't overnight. I mean, because Christians think it was like flip the switch, boom, Christianity was the norm. Like, no, it was a gradual thing, but it was just not as, they weren't as persecuted, so, but that's the thing is, so eventually the theology had to change. It went from a extremely pure, and I would even say pure religion, pure faith, to all of a sudden now being flooded with unbelievers because there was no consequence. And now, you get these concepts of, culturally religious, right? They're just born into it. You're born into, being a Muslim. You're born into these understanding, these faiths and these types of things.
If
But
I may, it's how you get places like Iceland, where 75% of the population is a member of the Church of Iceland, and yet 74% of the population doesn't believe a God exists.
right. I mean, yeah, that's perfect case in point. But I mean, the thing is going back to your single culture mentality. I mean, Paul didn't approach in Acts 17. He didn't approach those thought leaders and thinkers and say, look at my Jewish stuff. No, he used their culture, and he did not condemn the culture. He actually used the culture to communicate the gospel to them, to help them to understand. One of the apostles even got in trouble for basically causing these, these weird understandings of culture, and not wanting to sit with a group because this other group came into town, and so it's like, no, it's okay to understand and be who you are, and understanding the context in which you come from. Now, again, I'm not advocating for just simply redeeming your culture and just calling it good. No, because there are layers of culture. So there are things that I do not feel it's permittable if you are a Christian to participate in. There's certain ceremonies that we have as Native American people that my tribe has. There's one of these things. It's a kind of a more famous ceremony, and you may have heard of it, but it's a ceremony called the Sundance ceremony. And during the Sundance ceremony, is what they do is they dance for 4 days from sun up to sundown, and they do it in the hottest part of the year. And what they do is they dance in the hot sun, but also they pierce themselves through the chest, and they're doing this not as atonement per se, but it sort of has the idea of atonement, but not because they're paying for sin, but they are sacrificing a little bit of themselves, because of the blessings that Creator has given. And so, but what I get to do is, instead of just simply condemning that and saying that's evil, that's of the devil, guess what I get to do? I get to tell them, you know what? You don't have to do this anymore. Do you know why? Because there's a guy who's already done the Sundance for you. And his name is Jesus, because he's already sacrificed, not only just for the blessings, but he sacrificed for your sin. Now, listen to those two approaches. Because if you come in and just simply say what you're doing is of Satan and it's of the devil, and you know what, there's no God, you can't be redeemed because you're doing those types of things, or you actually use their culture to communicate and lovingly. See, and that's the difference, and that's the thing that I challenge my brothers and sisters in Christ in, because we are so used to doing what I would call lazy apologetics, because what we do is simply condemn something that we don't understand without truly trying to get to understand it. So getting to our brother's question, how can he help? Because he said, Brother Eric said, what is the path forward? And he does some work in Africa sometimes, and how do we help fix things? It's not hard. It's actually one of the easiest things you can do, is sit down instead of condemning people and trying to judge them. Sit down and get to know them, get to learn them, understand where they're coming from. And sometimes we just need to, the scriptures tell us that, we need to be slow to speak. And sometimes we have the mentality of, I need to go and save them. But guess what? Most of the times when I've gone into the mission field, even with my own people, I was the one that came out the most blessed, because I put down that mentality and realized that they taught me more than I could ever teach them. And yes, again, I'm not just trying to create these kumbaya moments. I understand that they need Christ. But the fact is that not every part of their culture, not every part of who they are is so broken, or it's unredeemable, because we go in thinking that they need to shed every single part of who they are in order to understand and know the things of Christ. And that's not true. That's not true in any culture, any context. So we need to put that down, and we need to understand those things. And so that's really what I'm advocating for, is not to just simply, understand, try to, come at these things just for the sake of, trying to cause cultural divide and all of these things. Like, no, that's not what I'm here for. And neither should we, neither should the church at all. The church needs to be more understanding, and the church needs to drop the gatekeeper mentality. And that's the challenge. I mean, that's going to be the challenge if we're going to get over a lot of these issues. And again, I know that it's super hard, because we've essentially dug ourselves into our ideological pits. And instead of attacking the wall that divides us, we're just lobbing truth bombs over the wall, hoping that we're going to hit the next guy on the head. And that's all this boiled down to. So that's why I appreciate conversations like this, because we can actually talk and listen to one another and hear one another, and not at each other's throats. And I know I've talked a lot, so far in this conversation, but the thing is like, many of my brothers and sisters, and you might even just be, maybe you're going to go after this live stream is over and go and vent or whatever. But I mean, still, the fact that you have opened up your platform, and I know that there's things maybe that you've disagreed with, but I think what people are finding is that there's a lot that we're actually agreeing with. And the fact that we would have never known that if we never had this conversation. So yeah, go ahead, brother.
Yeah. So I do want to get to one of the things that I think is a little bit more, I don't know if pointed is the right word, because we've been pretty pointed, perhaps a little bit more divisible, maybe. I don't know. We'll see what word I'm looking for as we continue to lay it out, right? So, because I think when we have a topic like this, there are two primary concerns that I tend to have. The first is our modernist lens looking into history, which I've hinted to a little bit already. And the second is an inability to deal with issues which have been caused from history. So I'll lay out a little bit of both because I think these are very important things to discuss. So with the first one, I will very often hear from either side, for the record, uh, kind of these grenades tossed at certain historical individuals for things they've done. I'll give two examples here that I think are relevant. So one of them would be, and I will grant that we don't have a African American brother with us, so this will be a little weird in the sense that there's no African American people here. But nevertheless, I think I think using Martin Luther King will be a better example, only because he's such a powerful figure, than using, for example, Crazy Horse, who unfortunately I'm not sure a lot of people know about. So Martin Luther King has been legitimately accused of heresy. I say legitimately because, according to Martin Luther King, he didn't believe that the Son was God. Didn't believe he resurrected. He kind of thought, if my understanding of his doctoral dissertation is correct, he essentially thought that Jesus was a really good philosopher who died for what he believed in, which kind of makes him a little bit of a religious charlatan because he spent his entire life as a pastor. A lot of people have also said he was, well, it's known that he was an adulterer, and it's been alleged that he was potentially violent with his spouse, although Coretta Scott King has denied that. And to be fair, we should honor the fact that she's denied that. And yet, at the same time, of course, not against that, but at the same time as that, Martin Luther King fought for the rights of people of color in a time and place where it was probably worse than it had ever been. I think a serious argument could be made that post-Civil War South was worse than pre-Civil War South for 100 years at least. Which is not to say pre-Civil War South was good. It's just simply to say that things got particularly bad after the Civil War in Reconstruction South, where people would, just regularly lynch African American people. And again, that's not to say slavery was somehow a cakewalk or anything like that, because it certainly wasn't. I'm just saying, as bad as it was, it seemingly got even worse for that 100 years after. And Martin Luther King had a lot to do with ending that, right? Likewise, Martin Luther King did a lot to try and bring unity between Black people and white people, as good as some individuals like, say, Malcolm X would be. Malcolm X, for most of his life, at the end of his life, he was very much for unity, but for most of his life, was relatively aggressive towards the United States as a nation and towards white people as a race, right? Martin Luther King, on the other hand, not that way. It was all peace and unity and love and making sure we all came together as one group, right? So you see there's these, and you'll see these James White figures. I admire James White a lot, by the way, but he'll only hammer on all of that negativity that I had talked about. But he won't talk about some of those good things, right? And then on the flip side, I see the other side do a similar thing with somebody like, for example, Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson is a traitor, and this is true. I'm not saying this is just a rhetoric. This is just a fact. Stonewall Jackson is a traitor. He did fight for a nation that was built on the idea that white people are superior to other races. He was, shall we say, aggressive, to say the least, in his tactical and strategical prowess, right? Wasn't really big on taking prisoners, in other words, wasn't very merciful, things like that, right? All true. At the same time, he was a devoutly Christian man who very much sympathized with Black people in his own nation, who before the war had taught people to read and write the Bible, and not the slave Bible, but the regular one, right? The one that actually is the scripture. And if you were a Virginian seeing 100,000 people march into your country, he did defend your nation against what you perceived at the time to be a foreign invader. But only, again, the negative is looked at in regards to some of the stuff that he did. Now, I'm sitting here in the year 2023 thinking, I don't like what James White does to Dr. King. And I also don't like what, for example, somebody like Eric Carson and Vocab Malone, who I think is both Vocab and James White, I respect very much. I'm not attacking either of them. Say about guys like Stonewall Jackson, right? I think both of them are intensely complicated figures who did very good things and also had some very bad qualities, right? And this becomes a problem when we start to do things like, we'll say that the Southerners who honor generals like Stonewall and Robert E. Lee and stuff like that are evil or perpetuating racism, or the Christians who are going to, for example, the 50th year anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, which is back in 2015, I think, are somehow giving into CRT and stuff like that, right? It's like both. I see what, from my perception, is a modernist bigotry against historical figures that I don't really appreciate. Now, I have a feeling that you might disagree with that a little bit, considering you have said in the past things like, Abraham Lincoln seems more analogous to me to a Hitler than he does to, and by the way, I don't think that that's necessarily even wrong of you to say. I think, if anything, I would say it's maybe a little bit simplistic, but nevertheless, I understand what you're saying when you say it, right? Or you've asked like the question, when was America ever great? So I have a feeling you might disagree with some of the stuff I'm saying here, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is, shouldn't we maybe acknowledge the kind of stuff that you would say while also acknowledging the kind of stuff that I'm saying here about, like, there is a lot of positive that took place in all of these situations, and there's enough blame to go around for everyone.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, and here's the thing too, is, so when I'm saying stuff, most of the time I'm trying to say stuff that's counter narrative, right? Because, like, anyone who understands, like, yes, I'm clearly benefiting from the advancements in technology and the things that have happened, right? So I'm sitting here on YouTube, and a lot of this stuff would not have happened without the Industrial Revolution, let's say. Does that make does the ends justify the means? And that's really where the question boils down, because people just simply want to make, and like you said, they want to have this thing so simplistic that it doesn't matter what anybody else says or what anybody else is and it's not even just about feelings. There are whole communities that are continuously and continuing to be marginalized. So you bring up the whole thing about Martin Luther King, and from my understanding, and MJ Jackson said it too in the chat, is that he rejected some of those views later on. But people want to point that out, is that because he had faulty doctrine, and they talk about Martin Luther King as far as, he had this so bad theology. But why did he have that bad theology? Why was there a reason that he had that faulty theology in the first place? Because Martin Luther King could not get into the places with good theology. So it's easy to look at it from one perspective and assume, and that is my problem with Dr. White, with James White, is that he does make all of these claims with authority without understanding some of the underlying issues, especially in because he taught church history. Now he's got it all figured out, but he teaches church history with one particular lens, and that's a problem. And that's where I push back on a lot of this stuff, because just like you said, things aren't always 2020. They are 2020 with your particular glasses, but you change the angle, it's a completely different scene. And so that's, and yes, I would agree. And you can feel, or some people might not like that I've looked at that Abraham Lincoln and said that he's actually statistically more genocidal than Hitler. Because, and why do I say that? Why? And because he helped displace and kill, and the things and the laws that he put paper to pen, or pen to paper, and the things that he endorsed, like the Homestead Act, like there's all of these things that he put in place, allowing, and under his tenure and under the all presidents, the thing is that these presidents took a population in the United States that was roughly, let's take a conservative number and call it, let's call it 20 million, just to be, and that's a very generous number. And at the end of Lincoln, or around Lincoln's end of him being done, and his time of his presidency being done and being assassinated, the the census records show that there was only roughly 250,000 Native Americans left in these lands. So if we say, let's just say 25 million, and that's still a very generous number. So you do the math. What's left? So you tell me who's more genocidal? Who made a bigger impact? But that's the thing, is, so yes, if you have a particular lens on, and you have a particular understanding, and you've been fed a number of particular facts, but you look at it from a different angle, different perspective, then yes, you are going to see a completely different outcome, or at least the picture is going to look a little bit different. And again, American expansion, right? Pushing west, all of those things, yes, for white America, it was great. But at whose expense, right? Because I even see here in the chat that someone, well, tribes fought other tribes, but we just went over that. McKeesport Rose Garden, we just went over that. So the whataboutism stuff, again, we need to stop with all of that, because that doesn't help with anything. Because what are you really saying? Oh, so it was okay then for this genocide to happen? It was fine for it to happen? Or are they even comparable to one another? Tribes completely exterminating tribes? I mean, I have the receipts in my files, and if anybody wants any of the receipts that I have to show that there were the literal purpose of the reservation system was extermination. The literal purpose for all was for the extermination of native peoples, even down to our blood quantum system. That's stuff that you don't think about. People don't think about it. But for us, culturally, Native Americans, we didn't have DNA blood systems. If you were culturally of our tribe, didn't matter what your born lineage was, guess what? You were our tribe if you said, I am of your tribe, and I'm going to practice your customs and be of you. It didn't matter if they were Crow, if they were Anishinaabe, if they were Kiowa, if they were Cherokee. It didn't matter if they were white or if they were black. So those are the things that we don't comprehend because we're not privy to some of that information. And yes, there are some nuanced things, but we also need to understand that your perspective does have a lot to do with how you view things. And so to sit up in your pedestal and make all these accusations and that's why I appreciate what you said, brother, because there is a different side to things, or it doesn't even have to be the complete opposite side. Just take a step to the side and look at it from a different perspective, a different angle, and you'll be surprised. But the thing is that we do such lazy apologetics, we do such lazy ministry, evangelism, all of that stuff, because we're comfortable with what we know, as opposed to trying to figure out how we can better serve those people. But instead, we have the mentality that I'm going to go there and these people are lost and these people are, and that doesn't make it untrue, right? Because we are to go to the lost. We are to preach the gospel to them. But that shouldn't be our mentality, because guess what? You were just as lost at one time. And you are not better, oh Christian. You are not better. Me, am not better. Even if we disagree, I am not better than you, and you are not better than me, because we both have the same Savior. So we got to get rid of that.
And I appreciate that a lot, because that's one of the cores of my concern with history. And of course, it comes up a lot today in regards to symbols. Typically, it tends to be Confederate symbols, but the Betsy Ross flag will have conversation around it as well. I think a lot of times certain questions about, like, dressing up for Native Americans for Halloween, and things like Redskins and Indians and stuff like that, as far as Washington and Cleveland sports teams and whatnot, they'll come up in those manners as well. And I get bothered by this idea, because it's almost like, people look at the honor that is bestowed on some, or on the flip side, the dishonor that is bestowed on some, and they just think that, man, it's so completely insane that somebody would have that view. And I for one just think that in a lot of ways, a lot of these guys are a mixed bag, and they have to be a mixed bag because they're human beings. I mean, who knows what 1,000 years from now people are going to be saying about our culture, and how far we will progress, you know what I mean? Or maybe lack thereof, who knows? I think that his society tends to fluctuate pretty much. But the issue, I think, becomes particularly poignant for modern society when we start to talk about these different, like I said, these cultural issues, or excuse me, not cultural issues, these cultural symbols, and we in fact, I saw, I don't know if he's still in the chat, but MJ Jackson was in the chat earlier, and he asked the question. And by the way, shalom to you, MJ. I may want to have the same conversation with you, because we talked about it at some time. But he had asked the question, I think I threw it here in the private chat. He said, is God's revelation able to transcend culture and time, or is it insufficient? And it's an interesting question, because the answer is yes. But I still think it's a little bit more nuanced than is being allowed for. Because when we look back at these historical figures, and I used Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther King is a modern, so his examples are not going to be as egregious to us. Like, it's one thing to cheat on your wife, it's another thing to go into somebody's house and murder their children. That's what Nat Turner did. Does that mean Nat Turner is a villain? No, that is in my opinion, very bizarrely simplistic way to look at history. But was that evil? For sure, right? For sure it was. It was diabolical. But it's also diabolical what people did to him to put him in the position to do that in the first place. It's like, and this is why I say it's like there's a big soup of evil, and we're all feasting on a second helping. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
but then one side will look at John Brown and we'll say, "Oh, you're communist because you like John Brown because he was a terrorist," and the other side will honor somebody like Robert E. Lee and like, "Oh, you're racist because you honor somebody like Robert E. Lee," or somebody will honor Tecumseh, "Oh, you're just a secessionist who wants to destroy America because you honor somebody like Tecumseh, who, I'm sure you know, but for the audience sake, it was a Native American chieftain who wished to establish like a pan-Native American nation." Um, which is just to say including multiple tribes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, not only do we have this very bizarrely simplistic view of these people, but we also put ourselves up on this pedestal where it's like I said earlier, I wouldn't have been that way, right? If I lived, I'm Jewish. If I lived in first century Israel, I for sure would not have put the nails in Jesus's hands, which is like, really? Really? Because 12 of them didn't. So are you really going to be so arrogant that you know for, and I'm not talking about you, and I'm not talking about MJ either, by the way, because I don't think MJ is arrogant. But it's just
No, MJ's arrogant. I know him personally. I'm just kidding.
Fair enough.
No, that's my brother. I love that guy.
But you know what I mean? It's like, are we going to be so arrogant as to say, I for sure I wouldn't have participated because I'm so different, right? When it's like, no, you're born in the modern world. You're born in a world where slavery is illegal and people don't cut little children up in warfare anymore, at least not very often. And we recognize war rape as a crime, and racism, while it's not a thing of the past, is certainly not as big a problem as it was in the 1700s when it was just a fact of life. Everybody was racist, right? And all these other different things. It's like you have that benefit of, and constantly the accusation comes, oh, well, that's just relativism. No, it's not relativism, because we're not saying what they did was right. We're not saying that it was okay to oppress Black people or that it was okay to commit acts of genocide or anything like that. We're simply trying to say, are we really going to put ourselves in a position to say we're so different that we can't recognize the good these people have done, or that we're going to look back and say, you might have done that, but I definitely would have been different. And I know I'm kind of repeating the same thing, but it's a big concern of mine. And I think it's a concern that has caused some very bizarre problems. Like just as an example, people, when they see the Confederate battle flag, they tend to think of racism. I've encountered 4 different ways of seeing that flag in my life. One is for sure racist. KKK and stuff like that do like to fly that flag, right? One is a kind of Southern cultural heritage that tends to be shared by a lot of people who are from that region. Another is and this is the way that I've tended to view it for most of my life, is as a symbol of the preservation of history, in light of what a lot of people, not you, not MJ, what others though have done in trying to kind of erase American history almost. And then yet a fourth one is just simply as the flag that represents that historical nation of the Confederacy, even though technically it wasn't actually their national flag, but that's not even the point, right? And when somebody has a certain view of that flag, then they go to those other 3 groups and they say, well, that's not what it means, but it is what it means because that's how that group is using it, right? I think another clear example of this is the Rastafarian flag. Is it the flag of Ethiopia? Yeah. Is it the flag of the Rastafarian religion? Yes. Is it the flag of marijuana smokers? Yes. And is it a flag of Black pride? Yes. Those are all true at the same time, but it's different groups of people in each one. You know what I mean? And all of it, I feel like, stems back to this poor look at history, where there's the villains and the not the heroes, the not villains. Come on, Jay. And I don't know. I'm ranting a little bit, but I do see it. I see it as potentially dangerous and somewhat self-righteous. And I wish that it was. I wish that we could all come together and recognize it's really not that simple. We we can say that Stonewall Jackson was an honorable man and also say he was a traitor to his country. Those can both be true at the same time. We can say that Nat Turner was fighting for freedom and also that he butchered innocent children. That is, those are both true at the same time. We can say that Crazy Horse was a defender of his own people and also that maybe his wartime lack of taking prisoners was something that would violate modern day mores of war. And those can both be true at the same time. It can be true that Native American groups fought each other and that the United States committed an act of genocide that is comparable to other acts of genocide like the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust. Those can both be true at the same time, right? And rather than just erasing all of our history and saying, well, they all did evil stuff, so let's just toss them out, and rather than justifying it all and saying, well, we're going to be relativists and make them men of their time, we can just recognize great men did great things and also had the power to and capacity to do evil things, and indeed did so. And I'll end it at that and then let you kind of respond to that. But then I also want to get to the other end of this, which is, okay, but what about the result of all that now, right? Like reservation culture and ghetto culture and stuff like that, and things that are the result of past evils. But I don't know. Go ahead and comment on anything I've said.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I agree. You know, is there something to learn from every aspect of history? Yeah, I think we need to. You know, to overgeneralize things is dangerous. You know, but again, I would challenge any one person to, you know, like I was doing earlier, to just, you know, look at these things from other cultures. Look at these things. Talk to people that have an opposite perspective from you. You know, try to understand why. And those things are, you'll find that there's more commonality than differences. But we're so afraid of difference sometimes. You know, we're so, you know, and that's the thing is, and there was a comment in the chat, you know, that I think is, you know, completely narrow-minded. You know what I mean? And so it just shows me that, you know, this person needs to get out of their silo and, you know, just simply, you know, talk to people about, because if they were really listening to what I was saying, I'm not advocating for just leaving people where they're at and saying that, oh, well, you know, let's just leave these people smoking peace pipes in their tents and all this kind of stuff, which is absolutely offensive, for one, because do you even know what the pipes were for when you make these generalizations? Do you understand those things? So what's wrong with not having a written language? You know, because my people, yes, didn't have a written language, but they actually sat down and told stories with one another. And there was a time of the seasons that it was appropriate to tell stories, and they would sit down and tell these stories to the next generation, and that's how they would keep the culture. But not only that, there's an ignorance there because they're viewing it from the idea that people from in Jewish times all had pens and papers in their house. You know,
Yeah.
that's ridiculous, because to have a scroll or to have even any part of scripture, you had to basically be royalty to be able to afford anything like that, for one. So there's some ignorance in that statement. And so that's where I push back, because some of the, you know, and that's those, this is the type of stuff that I'm trying to help people to understand. So again, you know, having these conversations is key. And I, you know, again, I appreciate this conversation. MJ said it too, you know, he appreciates this conversation because we need to have it, and we need to have more of it. and I just hope that, you know, people can use this. And I understand. I know that there's going to be people that come in, they come in half baked to this conversation, and then they already have their preconceived ideas. They might have heard some stuff that I said before, but then they're automatically assume that I'm woke, you know. But it has nothing to do with woke. I'm just presenting a different angle of history, and I'm not saying that you need to, you know, you need to sell out to it. What I'm saying is like, look, there's another side to this coin, and actually, it's not a coin. This coin is it's got 15 different sides to it, and if you're just looking at one side, it's easy to just assume it's flat, but it's extremely complex, and it's, you know, it's like the Mandelbrot, uh, you know, I forget what the Mandelbrot model, where it's so complex, it just keeps, you know, it just keeps regurgitating itself over and over and over again. But yeah, so none of this stuff is easy, and I get that. And none of this stuff is, and like you said at the beginning, we're not gonna solve the world's issues and the church's issues. But the thing is, you know, if you call me a brother in Christ, or you claim to be a Christian, but yet you can make comments just accusing people, then I think your heart needs to be checked, and you need to seriously do some checking of the heart. And I will say that with, you know, with confidence, because you know, if you're just going to do snap judgments, then your heart might be calloused in some way, shape, or form, and you know, and that might need some repentance. So anyway, that's where I'm at with that. Anyway.
Yeah, and I will add one thing to that. As I said earlier, but I'm sure more people have come in since then. Part of the reason I have you in particular on here, not just that we're having the conversation, but why choose Phil Fox and not somebody else, is because I want people to recognize there is a far left woke Christianity, and there is a far right. I don't know if they're all necessarily racist, but they use the word kinist Christianity, Andrew Torbas and people like that. And they do exist, but there is also divide on this issue amongst biblically conservative Christians. Um, One could even argue fundamentalist Christians, if one understands that word the way it was used 100 years ago. Um, and the fact that that disagreement exists means that we should probably be having more conversations about it, because it's not just as simple as you're woke and you're racist. It's really not, and it never will be, right? And really, it's not even that way in politics so much either. But I think, unfortunately, when you become a political pundit, you almost become a caricature of yourself. Not talking about anyone in particular, but I think it's true, right?
Some of whom were fired today.
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually, that's 100% true. Um, and Now, with that said, there's another side of this, because there's the side I've spoken about that I'm concerned about not you know, this sort of self-righteousness and not viewing people with their due honor or due dishonor. There is also the other side of this as well, which is there are still a lot of residual effects of some of the things that took place in the past, right? And I don't want to just stand on my soapbox and rant about the stuff I'm concerned about without giving the opportunity for everybody else to realize that is an equally valid issue as well. There
Right.
is, there is a sort of, I don't know if reservation culture is the right way to put it,
Yeah.
but there is a lot of issues with tribal sovereignty, with with health and healthcare, with the law,
Right.
things that buzzword have to be. And I want to point out, I am a incredibly conservative person politically, but I'm not an idiot, right? And
Right.
Are really examples of what we could describe as systemic racism,
Right.
or at least at the very least carryovers of systemic racism. Um,
Yeah.
and I do think that's something that does need to be discussed. I think sometimes maybe it's discussed in a weird way, Like, I don't, for example, think that I think we put a little bit. I've made the point before, and perhaps you can inform me because maybe I'm wrong, but I've made the point before that I don't think Cleveland Indians, that's hilarious. I don't think Cleveland Indians would have offended anybody if reservation culture wasn't a problem, right? In other words, if it didn't feel like the American government was against people, like, because you never see Norwegians and Celtic people complaining about the Boston Celtics or the Minnesota Vikings. I think part of that has to do with the fact that they're not typically feeling the impact of systemic issues, right?
Right.
So I have come to the conclusion, and again, perhaps I'm wrong about this, but I've come to the conclusion that things like Atlanta Braves, Cleveland Indians, maybe even to some extent Redskins, but I know that one is a little bit more dicey, um, wouldn't be considered a problem by people if it wasn't for the fact that we do have. I mean, I recently went to, about 2 years ago, a reservation in South Dakota. You may even know the one I'm speaking about. Um, that has an 85% illiteracy rate, which is absurd. I mean, that's third world country stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's right here in the United States. I went there, right?
Mhm.
And of course, there's just little tourist attractions, which is kind of insulting.
Pine Ridge, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Right out, it's like a less
Just
than an
outside
hour
of.
driving Rapid City.
Yep. South and east.
Mhm. And that is a real problem. So I think that too often we do have, and I'll let you speak on this here after I say this, but too often we, on the conservative side, my own side, we do look at that and say that's just whining, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and stuff like that. And it's not as if there isn't some truth to stuff like that. I do recognize that we definitely need to all be somewhat self-sufficient. But as I've heard you explain, and as some of my own Native American friends in, here in the outside world have explained to me, even when you try to do that, which is the what you should do, it's not like it's that simple. So,
Right.
well, I'll just stop there and say let's talk about that for a minute because I think that's an important element of this conversation also.
Yeah. So, so first we'll do the reservation topic first, and then the mascot thing. You're right. There is a problem when it comes to reservation life. Some of I mean, look at the statistics of Native American children and some of their opportunities. So we have the least of any demographic as far as job opportunities on the reservation. Suicide rates are typically 5 times higher on any reservation than anywhere else in the United States. And these are real life systemic problems. And I know people have a problem with that word, systemic. But Native American reservations are typically food deserts, healthy food deserts. Where the town that I grew up in, born and raised, not born but raised, because I was born in a small hospital that was like 30 minutes away from my hometown because again, systemically there is an issue because we don't have a hospital on my reservation. That was taken away by the U.S. government because the Army Corps of Engineers flooded without our permission. They just flooded our reservation and put a big lake right in the middle of it. Didn't ask us, told us that the dam was going up, and we lost a ton of resources that we had. One of them, including, was a hospital. So we have to be born in hospitals that are off the reservation, outside the reservation, and we don't have health care, access to good health care. Despite if we have insurance or not, that the insurance issue is not there's no access. And so, people think, well, just get rid of reservations then. Why don't we just get rid of them? Okay, then why don't we just honor the treaties then? Because we were promised and we were sold this understanding by the U.S. government and by churches, that this is how things were supposed to go. And so there are food deserts on the reservation. Many people are far below the poverty line. And we talk about the poverty line as if because you're above the poverty line that all of a sudden you have all this disposable income. Just because you're above the poverty line does not mean that you are successful and able to have 4 cars and all these houses and whatnot. No, if you're above the poverty line, you're just making it. And so the thing is that reservations were strategically placed away from city centers. So there are no big towns or bigger cities around. You look on the map, find a reservation, and look and measure how far it would be. We used to have to drive 3.5 hours just to find a Walmart. So imagine that. Your basic everyday resource that you can just cruise down the road and get, or even just at a mom and pop shop. We used to have to drive 30 minutes for gas. So we'd have to make sure that there was enough gas in our tank to make it to town, that's what we used to call it, so that way I can fill up my gas tank. And so these things it was built in, hoping that we would not survive. And so that's a systemic issue. Reservations were put in place to detain us and to hope that we would die out, because they were not put in the route. If even the railroads, if you look, superimpose the railroads over the reservation, like a reservation map. I even did this one time. And the railroads go around the reservations. So the railroad was not meant to bring resources to reservations. They was meant to go around them, so that way they can get the supplies to where they needed them, which was the typical city centers, population centers. So reservations were strategically put away from the populated white cities and towns. That's a problem. And those symptoms still exist today. So how are you going to ask people and tell people to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, go out and get a job when there are no jobs? Well, move then. You should be able to move. Why aren't you moving? How are we going to move when you don't have a car? How are you going to move when you don't have the money to even pay your first month's rent and your deposit? How are you going to do that?
Yeah, and if I may add too, I think, and there is a lot to be said about, I have adopted a sort of view of I wonder if maybe Russell Means had the right idea. Not that obviously, it's not that everybody should go to their own place or anything like that, but I think every people group should have a place to go to if they so choose. And I wonder if that would help with a lot of the problems. Maybe Lakota would be kind of hard, I wonder, only because it's landlocked and surrounded by another foreign nation. That would be problematic potentially. But it does seem like perhaps that could at least help in so much as that people would have a place to leave, if, like I said, if they so choose. You could be Irish in America if you want, but you can also go move to Ireland if you want to, and that's the historic homeland of the people, right? At the same time, though, and this is the thing I wanted to add, the move question has always been particularly annoying to me. And again, I know I'm going to irritate some of my conservative friends, of whom I am amongst, but I could just imagine somebody growing up in South Dakota in the Black Hills, and that's where their father lived, and where their father lived, and where their father lived, and you so on and so forth, 20 generations back. And then you're going to say, well, why don't you just leave? It's like, that's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, insensitive is such an overused word today. and people you see insensitive as kind of weak. Well, it just be less sensitive to things like that. Then it's like, but it's not. It's more than insensitive. You know what I mean? It's like this is the homeland of my family, dating back before cars existed and railroad tracks existed and words like Nez Perce were given to, or whatever other tribe is out there. I know there's like over
Mm-hmm.
500 of them before they were even called these things, and we've lived here, and then you're just gonna say we'll just leave, right? In America, you could say the same thing. People talk about inflation. Well, if inflation's bad where you are, we'll just leave. It's like, well, I grew up here.
Yeah.
My dad grew up here. My mom grew up here. Their parents grew up here. Right. So you don't want to just leave because that's your historic homeland, you could say. It's like the same thing applies to other people. And that has always been particularly annoying to me. Because leaving the reservation does, and another thing too, if I may, um, one of the other reservations I've been to is Wind River in Wyoming. I think
Beautiful.
it's called Wind River. And
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that struck me about it was that I did not meet a single Native American there.
Right.
None. There's just zero. I met
Well, it's just you
hundreds
probably went to
of
Riverton, right? You're
yeah,
probably in Riverton. Yeah. So that's the
yeah.
problem, is that there's. So yeah, I mean, another symptom, right? Reservation land. It was illegal for Native Americans, individual Native Americans, to own land until the United States government figured out that they may have given too much land away. So in the idea of CRT, there's this thing called interest convergence, right? Where it's only when the interest of the dominant culture intersects or not, or converge, because I know there's another thing. I don't want to get it confused with intersectionality. But when the interests of the two converge is only when we see movement. So here's an example of that. And again, I'm just saying these are things that are symptoms. So it was illegal for an individual Native American to own land until the United States wanted to recoup some of the land that they gave back to the Native American people and the tribes, because it wasn't given to the people, it was given to the tribes. So their way around that is a thing called the Dawes Act. It was the Allotment Act. So now miraculously, oh my goodness, here's a good idea. Why don't each of your individual members get some land? But wait, 5 minutes ago, it was illegal for them. Why is it all of a sudden legal? Oh, well, you have a surplus of land. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of that land back, and we're going to actually give that and sell that to white settlers. And so there are this concept of checkerboard reservations. The Umatilla tribe, go look at their reservation out in Washington State. There's checkerboard reservations down south in the Navajo Nation. There's white communities even on my reservation that I grew up in. There are parts of the reservation that are densely populated Native communities, usually the smaller villages, and there are white communities who are predominantly white, and there are some Native people in mixed in, but they're predominantly white, and that's why. So again, understanding these concepts and looking at these things, it makes sense as to why CRT is catching on with some people. But again, like, I'm not advocating for it, but it's just it's curious that some of these things are happening and that we only see progress when it benefits dominant culture. And so it's very telling when you look at these things from a different perspective, that all of these things aren't just what meets the eye. And again, like I said, your ear is going to take that and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, he just stated one of the tenets of CRT. Yeah, because I've been reading the actual literature of it. And I'm not saying I'm down with it, all of it, but it's just curious how some of these things actually fall in line when you look at some of these things. That being one of it. But guess what? The Allotment Act predates CRT, so it can't be CRT. So anyone who wants to come with that kind of stuff, no. But it is curious when those types of things happen, because there is this idea of, if it benefits the dominant culture, then we'll make headway, then we'll make movement. But that's a prime example of those types of things happening. And so, and again, guess who also benefits from those types of things? The church, the Christian. So we are not exempt, family, Christ family. We are not exempt. We are benefiting from some of the direct oppression of people. And so yeah, that's one of the things as far as reservations. And then, did you have something else you wanted to add to that? Because I'll also do the address the mascot topic, and then that'll have to be our last thing.
Just one brief point, which is that I remember, now it turns out it's historically not true, but there's an old cliche that Mussolini made the trains run on time. And the point was to say that sometimes these guys come to prominence because those who are more moral, perhaps, are not willing to deal with the problem themselves. Now, in historical fascist Italy, it's actually not true that the train started to run on time. But the point of the cliche is just to say, and it has run true time and time again throughout history, if people refuse to act on something, then somebody who's nefarious eventually will. Mm-hmm. And so, I think there is a lot of things that are potentially very dangerous about what we call the quote woke mob today. At the same time, sure, if normal, I shouldn't use the word normal, that is kind of a weird word to use, but if American Christians,
oppressor,
like myself, say again?
I said oppressor.
Right.
Normal. See, I'm normal, you're not. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Well, I do got the long hair and the beard and all that, I guess. Well, it's not even really a beard, right? It's just some peach fuzz. But anyways, no, but what I mean is, if we don't find a way to solve some of these issues or take them seriously, then eventually the woke skulls are going to be the only voice that's saying anything about it. And then people gravitate to that, right? It's like, you can live, and I'll put myself in the shoes of somebody who I'm not, right? Say I'm a Native American, and for my whole life, I've gone through all the issues which you have gone through in real life, but I'm playing my hypothetical, right? And, the Ron Pauls of the world won't listen, and the Ted Cruzes of the world won't listen, and the Tucker Carlsons of the world won't listen, and the James Whites of the world won't listen, and even on the other side of that, the Hillary Clintons of the world won't listen, and the Bernie Sanders of the world won't listen, and I don't know if I've heard Eric Mason talk about it, but I don't remember it, at least, right? Then it's like, okay, well, this guy over here, he's talking about it. Nobody else is. And now I start to get indignant. Now I start to feel like the world is against me. And in a way, I'm kind of right. And the only person who I have refuge in is this guy over here who's saying that, that we're better because we're the melanated peoples or stuff like that. Like a lot of the Black Hebrew Israelites will say and stuff like that. And it's like,
yeah,
if you don't want people to fall into their hands, then take their concerns seriously. Doesn't mean you have to give in to everything, but it does mean, like, do something about it, because it's serious problems.
No, yeah. And I have my, my view about some of that too. Like, I think that's why the LGBTQ community has come on so strong, because of late 80s, early 90s fundamentalism. And unfortunately, if we think about it, just walk with me for a second, they're using the same tactics on us now as far as their tactics on trying to silence that the fundamentalists were using back when they were railing against hip hop and railing against homosexuality and those types of things. And so we don't like it because we're on the opposite end now. So again, taking those things seriously, because the church likes to sweep things under the rug, like, oh, well, we're just gonna condemn it, we're not gonna deal with it. And so that model is why we have groups just like you mentioned, the Black Hebrew Israelites. That's why we have a large portion of Native American communities that absolutely have a distrust for the name Jesus. That's a problem. And making quotes and simply making quotes like, oh, well, actually oppression has really brought a lot of people to Jesus, because I've seen it in the chat. Making statements like those are absolutely ignorant, because what you're doing is you're oversimplifying, and you're victim blaming, and you're just simply saying, oh, it's okay that you were oppressed. But did God not judge nations? So for some reason, we think that America is exempt from judgment from God because we're quote unquote a Christian nation. That's baloney. That's garbage. And you need to sit down and repent from your idolatry, because to simply say stuff like that is blasphemous, because you are not supposed to be of this world. You're supposed to represent King Jesus. And to over romanticize America's oppression and say, oh, it's okay because we have saved so many souls, that makes it okay for the oppression. That makes it fine. We're supposed to kumbaya to that and supposed to thank you. Like, yes, I understand. And many of my Native people, I wish that you can see and could have listened to some of the stories that my grandmother would tell. Because guess what? Even me growing up, I was in high school at the turn of the century. I graduated in 2002. And even then, playing basketball in high school, I was still called a prairie nigger. In 2002, in 2000, my mom in the 80s, their team was spit on. This is stuff that you think, oh, this is Jim Crow era type stuff. But no, we still deal with it today by comments like that in the chat. And the thing is that, even my elders, and this is what I wish that people could hear, is that my elders taught me not to have hate for, and I'm just going to say it, they would say, don't have hate for them whites, because they are scared, because they don't understand who we are and why we remained as strong as we do, because they tried to take everything from us. And I could easily be so calloused and have so much hatred for white people, but I don't. Because do you know what my community told me? They said, have pity on them. And this almost sounds like our Savior, because what I was told, it says, they would say, have pity on them because they don't understand what they are doing. And those are the things that I was taught and I was ingrained. So if you want to think that just because my culture didn't have Jesus, there's a lot of principles that were instilled in my culture, even though we didn't understand and know who Jesus was. But yet the Jesus people had the audacity to call us savages. Meanwhile, they were raping our women, they were stealing our children, they were taking our land, and they were telling us that we need to forgive. But meanwhile, they're warring with all of these other nations. They're warring with each other. They're using black people as pawns. They're using brown people as pawns. So, and again, and yeah, I definitely agree that not all whites think that way. And that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to provide a counter narrative, because unfortunately, many people that I have run into, and when I have conversations like this, people don't want to listen. They automatically shut off. Oh, you're a social justice warrior. I'm not going to listen to anything you say. But yet they're going to go and spout great replacement theory. Oh, we're being replaced. Look at, they're just trying to bring in the minorities to counteract our vote because they just want a godless America. I'm saying that America's already godless. And you Republicans who think you are, and you Democrats who think you are, you're that's not the God of the Bible. I'm sorry. North Dakota, one of the most red states in the union, they just passed a bill to make sure that underfunded children, or people that come from families who can't pay for meals, they shot down a bill to make their meals cheaper or to make their meals free. But yet they increased their budget for their lunches and their paid meals for all of the state workers to have a higher budget for their own lunches and meals, to get reimbursed $10 extra per meal. But yet North Dakota claims to be pro-life. No, you're just pro-abortion. You're just anti-abortion. But yet we make it harder for children to get lunches. So, I mean, these are the things, and that's what I'm saying. We need to look at all of the angles instead of just spouting off the things that we've been taught, and what our grandpa told us, and what our mom told us, and what dad told us, and what pastor told us, and what Fox News told us, what MSNBC told us. And so that's those are the things. Lastly, regarding the mascot issue, I disagree. I think mascots are completely Native American mascots are completely offensive. And you know, brother CJ, you mentioned, well, what about what about the Scandinavian people, and they have, the Vikings and all these kind of things. Well, do they still have direct ties to some of those things? I'm sure they do. But are they practiced in their everyday culture? Are they practiced in their everyday, or are those things that they're trying to hold on to? And do they have relevance in their here and now? And that's where the difference would be, is because we are still here and now. So the drunk kid that's wearing war paint, does he understand what war paint is and what it does and what it's supposed to represent? The drunk, the little drunk girl that's running around wearing a headdress, does she understand the significance of the headdress and what that means to my people today? Not of yesteryear, today. Do people understand and know what the hairstyle of the mohawk is and what it means and what it represents? All of these things have meaning today. If I wanted to wear war paint, guess what? I don't have that right in my culture. I can't just slap it on because it looks cool. I have to earn that right, or that right has to be given to me in my culture to wear a particular color. Now, I can't just decide what color I want to wear of war paint. The war bonnet, the big war bonnet, that's only given to or worn by people in a place of honor. That's not an everyday garb. In the movies where you see them wearing war bonnets throughout whatever, you know, just in the village and whatever, like that's movie fiction. That wasn't how it was done in our culture. Being able to paint your horse was also another honor. These are all things that are relevant to us even today. So it's not just simply about the mascot itself. It's about the way that these people choose to represent us. When people go, oh, that, if you do that and you are a male, guess what? You are out of order, because that is something that only women do. So you're being effeminate, and that's no good. And if I did that in my culture, my grandmothers would be all up and down me, and my grandpas would be all up and down me, asking why I'm acting like a woman. Why are you being like a woman? Why are you acting that way? So when we're singing our war songs, that stupid chant that I hear, oh, that's stupid. Because our songs have meanings. The why we do them has meaning. It has beauty. It has culture behind it. It's not just, we don't just do it just simply for show. And yes, there are songs that we sing. We have all the types of songs that you have in any culture. We have love songs, we have songs of hurt, we have healing songs, we have ceremonial songs, we have worship songs, we have every type of song that you have in culture. But what are they doing when they're doing those types of chants? Are they doing it for honor of Native American people? Or are they just making a caricature of people who don't matter to them anymore? Because we've been fighting for this for generations, and we've been saying this for generations. And yes, I get it. There'll be that one guy that they'll get, and they'll say, hey, so and so, he said that doesn't matter to Indian people. Well, yeah, but did they talk to a Native American who actually is in the culture and practices the culture? Did they talk to them? So that's where I would stand, because the thing is that it affects people in understanding people. And if you just simply pass it off because, oh, this is our American culture way, and this is how it's been done for generations, and they were called the Redskins since I was a kid, does that make it okay? No. So that's where it, again, if it was just about the mascot, that'd be fine. Do it. But it's how it's represented. And are there some teams that are doing it right? Absolutely. The Florida Seminoles, they contacted the Seminole people and asked, hey, can we use your name? And they're actually paying them. They offer discounts for their tribal students to go to their college because they're using their name. So yeah, there are good ways to do it. There are ways to do it the right way. So that's the thing, is that again, we look at it from one angle and we just assume. But again, if you look at it from their perspective, right, then if yeah, Florida State does that war chant all game long, and that's the thing, is yeah, I mean, I would get rid of some of that stuff, but again, I'm not giving them a pass either for doing that. But they're making a good faith effort to try to make things and do things the right way.
Yeah, and I was about to say, I do see, even with the chant that you had said there earlier was the Kansas City Chiefs,
Mm-hmm.
and there is certainly a difference between what Florida State does and what the Kansas City Chiefs do, because they have the direct endorsement and have, I think, for decades at this point, of the Florida Seminole tribe. And like you were even saying, they do have things with you have a discount for Seminole members to attend this university and stuff like that. So even with the war chant and some of the mascot stuff, I'd say there is differences.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I do, and I want to be clear here, I'm not discounting anything that you just said. But one of the things that does make me wonder about stuff like that is, now the Vikings, there's a lot of truth in what is said there. But we do have a lot of other groups that are kind of represented in similar ways. The Fighting Irish or the Celtics have this caricature of a guy in green with the bright red hair, and he's doing this whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
and and the sports teams are adopting a lot of Irish cultural customs and stuff that they still do to this day in Ireland, right? And Irish is a particularly big one, because with a lot of cultures, admittedly, it is not as common, right? Vikings are the Norwegians of 1,000 years ago. They're not the Norwegians of today. That is true. But with Irish, maybe not so much. Raging Cajuns is one that does come to mind, which is Louisiana Lafayette. And some of the other stuff that is, similar to that. Now, I could potentially see, I'm trying to put my my other side cap on, right? Take this off, put the other side cap on.
Turn it around.
Irish, right? It could be said, I guess, that Irish people make up the majority of the population of Boston at some time, or at least the majority of the minority population at one time. I think nowadays, probably most people in Boston are descended from Irish people who live there, if they've lived there generationally at least. It's a pretty transient city, like all big cities are. And so it could be said, okay, the Boston Celtics are the Celtics because Irish people dominate Boston.
Yeah.
And I can see that. That isn't, and in that sense, you do have something that's somewhat analogous to Florida State more than it's analogous to Cleveland. But with like Notre Dame, for example, they're the Fighting Irish because they're Catholic. And it doesn't really go much farther than that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not an Irish university. And so what my question becomes here, and again, this is not in a way to try and discredit anything you said, because I'm obviously not Native American. I have been asked the question before, how would you feel about the New York Hebrews baseball team? And I think I would probably think that was pretty cool, but I obviously don't speak for everybody else who's Jewish. And I am also speaking about hypothetical. Maybe I wouldn't think it was pretty cool if it actually happened. So I do get that.
Yeah.
But what is the key difference between Celtics, Fighting Irish, so on, and Indians, Seminoles? I will admit Redskins is a tad different, only because I know Redskins was used as a racial slur at one point in time, which does make it somewhat unique. I know at the time, the logo was Native American, was designed by a Native American, and there was some stuff about maybe at the time, because things were so bad, it was a little bit more acceptable then. At the same time, though, it would be, and I hope everybody kind of forgives my French here a little bit, but it would be a little bit analogous to saying like the Santa Fe Wetbacks or something like that, which is like,
no.
Is it really honor at that point? I don't know. It is an interesting thing there. But with some of the other teams, it does cause me to wonder if perhaps these feelings are not so much grounded in the offense itself as much as it is the fact that it's like, it feels, I can imagine it feels much more like you're using a culture for mascot purposes only that you don't really care about, if when you turn around, that actually turns out to be true, right? Like if you go to a Florida State game and they're wearing headdresses and stuff like that, I could see it feeling like, okay, that's just them using my culture. If then you turn around and there's reservations that are poorly run and that the government doesn't help with at all, and that people are less than citizens until 1924 and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if that wasn't the case, like it is with the Irish, would they still feel the same? I don't know. I'm playing a hypothetical game as somebody who's not Native American, but do you kind of see what I'm saying, or am I out of bounds here?
Yeah, no. I get what you're trying to articulate, but so my question would be: would it be appropriate for the like you said the Brooklyn Jews, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that were a team, and I wouldn't be opposed. But here's the thing, though, is so now all of a sudden they start wearing yarmulkes or wearing the little hat with the little curls,
Right?
And then carrying a scroll, and every time they made a basket, they throw the scroll on the court or something like that. I mean, it's so again, like there's misrepresentation when it comes to Native culture, and because it's an American institution, it's justified to misrepresent those people, and just like, and it's and part of it too is representation, right? And that's really what it boils down to, because yes, the Fighting Irish, there's a community that has embraced that, right? But what if there was a community that didn't embrace it, that found it offensive? Do they not matter simply because everybody else sees that it's fine? Or are they just going to call them and pass them off and say, oh, they're just being uptight and whatever? Are their feelings invalid? Are their cries and the things that they're seeing wrong? Are they not? Because this is historically because Native Americans have been stamped down in number wise, that we're a very low, our population amount in America is very low percentage wise. So our voice has been very weak for a long time because we just simply haven't been heard. And also because we have been pushed off to the side, literally pushed off to the side by reservations. And so that's the problem, is that many Native Americans became displaced, and not displaced, but they, sort of passive and lackadaisical when it came to these things, because we're like, what's the point of even saying anything, because no one's going to hear it. And we've always been told, just, quit. This has been, that's just the way it is. But it's funny though, because I remember a good friend of mine wore the red shirt with the gold emblem, and it had Caucasians on there instead of the Indian head mascot. It was a white guy, and he wore this shirt around. And my buddy is not a small dude. I mean, dude's like 6'4", maybe 250, 260. The guy is big, and he was stopped multiple times walking around the city of Bismarck, North Dakota. And people were like, dude, that's offensive. How you even dare you wear that shirt? And it's like, okay, so if it's offensive for that, then it's clearly offensive for other things. So
yeah, and I will admit there is a certain level of preference in that, in so much as, I own a shirt that is Caucasians, and it's Chief Wahoo, but he's a white guy with a tie. And I think it's hilarious.
yeah.
But admittedly, that doesn't mean everybody. Obviously, otherwise that Bismarck experience wouldn't have happened, right? So it is, it is true that different people are probably going to see that a different way. I guess the question maybe then becomes: is anybody right? I don't know. I also live in Boise, so everybody else around me thinks it's hilarious because I'll admit we're a rather insensitive lot up here in Idaho. But again, that's not to invalidate that story at all. It's just to say I I can see how somebody might take that shirt that I think is funny and think of it as, um, offensive.
Mm. Yeah. And yeah, proclaimer of the gospel of Jesus. I mean, yeah, there is a degree of being too sensitive too. I do think that for sure. I mean, being nitpicky about certain things is one thing. If it was just simply, um, if it was just about semantics or whatever, that like I get that. But the problem is that these are still sacred objects within our culture. So that'd be like, you know, it'd be like a Christian school, or not, or a non-Christian school, right? A non-Christian school being the Crusaders, or being the priests or the Christians, and everyone's throwing around Bibles and desecrating, crosses and these types of things, or Jesus coming out on a cross or something. You would find that offensive, right? So this is the same thing for my people, whether you agree with it or not. So it'd be that those same similar things that you would find absolutely appalling, but because it doesn't affect you, you think, oh, you're being too sensitive, or oh, my cousin doesn't care and he's a blah 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 and he doesn't give a crap about his heritage or whatever. But guess what? I have a rich heritage about who I am. I was raised in it and I know it. I come from the Low Cap clan, and I'm a child of the Chicken clan. That has meaning. And whether it hits you or not, that means something to a large group of people. And so simply because your cousin doesn't care, like those types of things, like maybe they don't know who they are. They might know that they're Mexican. They might know that they have this heritage, but they might not understand or even know who their clans are. Because unfortunately, most of my relatives that are in Mexico and in South America don't even know who their clans are. They don't even know what tribe they are, because they've been stamped by the conquistadors in the Spanish. So much so that they don't even have the identity of understanding who they are. They're just Mexican. But they can't even trace what tribe they were. And that's sad. To not even have a physical identity. Now, again, I keep seeing over and over in the chat that, oh, well, who cares? It's about Christ and your identity in Christ. Yeah, absolutely. Because guess what? I identify as Christ first. And the whole reason why we're having this conversation is because I'm trying to help you understand that there are counter narratives out there. Because I am spiritually Christ first, above all. Hear me on that. Hear me on that. I am a Christ follower. Jesus is my King. He is my Lord. But I am also a Native American, brought up in that culture to help proclaim and to preach gospel to that group of people. I have a unique perspective to be able to reach them. So, because sometimes you, brothers and sisters who are in the chat, cannot, because of your callous, because of your misunderstanding, and because of your lack of want of understanding, because you want to stay in your silo. And I call you out of that. That's why we're having this conversation. That's why we have to have these types of conversations. And I'm not condemning you. Please don't see that. I say these things with love, because I love my brothers and sisters in Christ. But it's not okay to continue to abuse people that you disagree with. But brother, with that, I gotta take my time. and I gotta get rolling here. If you got last words or closing words or closing arguments or whatever, whatever you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually was noticing we talked about an hour and a half, and it's now been 2.5. So I want to apologize about that.
No, that's, I mean, I could have, cut it off too, but no, I mean, I just, first of all, your audience, I know that there has been disagreement, and I know that a lot of you disagree with what I'm saying. And that's okay. I still love you guys, and I appreciate, Nate 2D2, who's trying to, he's a bridge. Nate 2D2 is a bridge. And I know that some of the stuff that, that I say, like I told you in the beginning, it's going to be different to your ear. And, I think it's healthy, and I don't hate anybody. I don't have distaste for any people group. And I'm not trying to elevate or say that people need to be stuck in their cultural sin and just continue to be whatever they are, whether it's Native American, whether it's Hispanic, whether it's Egyptian, whether it's Hebrew. We're all lost in this world and we need to find Christ. And as my brother CJ, we just need to, just submit, because we've already been predestined to Christ. So,
yeah. Well, to be fair,
stop the evangelism. Stop the evangelism. Stop the evangelism. You've already been called. Okay. They've already been called. No, I'm just kidding. Just giving you a hard time, brother.
No, I appreciate it. I recently was in a debate with Kelly Powers, and he asked, well, you consider me a brother, then how come I'm not a Calvinist? And I said, hey, God predestined you to himself. He didn't predestine you to John Calvin. But anyways, no, I appreciate this conversation very much. And I hope to have more like it in the future if you're ever interested, and with other people in the chat as well. Sure. I don't know if MJ or BK or Vocab or anybody else is still in the live chat, but if any of you guys are, doors are open. I think this conversation is very important, precisely because I know that we're going to end up disagreeing on some of these things, and yet we are still brothers and sisters in the same family, and citizens or subjects, depending on how you'd like to word it, of the same kingdom. And also literally, in the sense that, well, I shouldn't say literally, because we are literally subjects of the same kingdom. But what I mean is temporally here in our world, we are also citizens of the same nation. Mm-hmm. So this is important politically, it's important culturally, and it is important to the body of Christ, I think. So, brother, I appreciate having you on here. And do you want to tag anything of yours before you get out?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would encourage you, if you disagreed with any of the stuff I'd say, just, come and listen to some of the stuff I do have to say. You can find me at Mr. Phil Fox on YouTube, all your socials, Facebook, I'm friendly, you can find me on Facebook under, I think Philip Fox, I think. But yeah, come look me up, friend me. I usually friend people if, as long as I see, CJ's your friend or whatever, I'll probably friend you or whatever, but yeah, I mean, just, come and check us out, come and check it out, and feel free to disagree. You know what I mean? I'm not afraid of any of that. And, I just, the only thing is just, keep it respectful. You know what I mean? Because I'm not here to disrespect you. I'm not here to disrespect anybody else. But I also know that you have your convictions as well, and I know some of you, because like I said, I used to be extreme conservative, and so I know that you view it as an act of love to be harsh towards your brother, because you want to call them back to the right thinking or whatever, however we justify that. So yeah, so look me up, and I look forward to conversations.
Absolutely. And with that, friends, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Brother Phil's given us more time than we even were originally asking for. So I want to say very much appreciate you being here. Basic channel housekeeping, friends. If you like this, please remember to like and share the video. Consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Of course, if anybody wants to contribute to us, you can do so with PayPal, Patreon, or Super Chats or Super Stickers. Be on the lookout for my my work coming out here in about a month. 18 questions for the Reformed answered. And join me tomorrow over on the Freed Thinker. We're going to talk to Tyler Vela about some of the intellectual reasons for his deconversion, and hopefully that'll be as fruitful of a conversation as this one is as well. Which I have every reason to suspect it will, because I quite like Tyler, but nevertheless. God bless you guys in the chat. God bless you, Brother Phil. If the Lord wills and tarries, we will see you here soon.